Welcome.
We start off our journey by pushing the brightness to the max, because YouTube compression makes darkness looks weird, and definitely not because I'm scared of the dark. We get our first look at the main character, or as I like to call him, depressed man in a chair. I then proceed to get verbally assaulted by my own guards.
No, your other right.
That's his left, dipshit.
Luckily, I get greeted by two beautiful women for a lovely dinner, which promptly gets quite ruined by a gunshot and a very rude man driving a van. And this is our quite hasty introduction to Darkness 2. Already we're coming to a point in the game where we might need to be doing some shooting rather than using the darkness. It is what I would consider probably one of the first challenges that we're going to come across in whether or not we can actually complete this game using only the darkness. Luckily, being on the easy mode, called Thug, we don't actually need to shoot any of these guys to continue on. As they seem to riddle me with holes and bullets, I can just kind of oddly stare off into the distance, and eventually, the guy who's carrying me starts moving again. It was at this point that I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe this run is actually going to be possible, just using the darkness. Slowly but surely, being dragged to safety, just being riddled by bullets, I wonder if there's going to be a point in the game where I will actually need to take out some of these guys. And here we're coming across the first of those points. I sat here and took bullets, waiting for my guy to carry me on, but unfortunately he never did. And so, I come across the first area where I might need to actually do something. Deciding that ending the run here would be pretty stupid, I decided to give these guys a few flesh wounds. That way, I can say that I never had to actually kill these guys, but they may have not been walking away from this anytime soon. Once the last of the men sprain their legs, I get to move on to the next part of the game, without needing to take any more shots. A very rude man decides to make a human souffle out of me and Vinny. He unfortunately succeeds, and we're forced to use the darkness for the first time. Letting the darkness free of its prison that is my soul, it continues to butcher everyone around me. Finally, having access to the darkness, our true darkness only run can begin. All this violence and maiming is just a quick sneak peek into what the rest of our run is probably going to look like. Having consumed the hearts and souls of those men, my leg is finally healed, and I won't be needed to be carried around anymore, and I can finally walk on to the rest of this game. The question that we need to ask ourselves is what is going to count as a darkness-only run. For example, if I pick up a lead pipe and throw it at a guy using the darkness tentacle, does that count as a darkness-only kill, or do I actually need to use the tentacles? If it is the latter, then unfortunately we come across the first place where we may need to make a sidetrack from the original run, where we are being forced here to kill these two men with items around us rather than with the darkness tentacles themselves. Though hopefully you were distracted from that technicality by this lovely violence and blood and gore display. It is also at this point where we are forced to pick up our first gun. Though we plan on not using any of the ammunition in this gun, we are forced to pick it up to continue on with the level. Continuing on with the level basically just entails running around with our darkness and, well, beating people to death with it, and perhaps eating their hearts every now and again. I also have my first run-in with, well, what you may consider just to be a light, and the darkness does not like, well, the light. And if you go anywhere near the light, your darkness kind of just goes away. Unfortunately, from all the men that I've been butchering, I have been picking up their ammunition, and to the best of my ability, I will try to empty out all my mags before continuing on to the rest of the game, to best do what I can to not use the guns. Continuing on, I get blown into next week, and by next week I'm talking about this doorway here, and I get to meet our lovely little stinky friend.
What's that smell?
Our stinky friend, who we'll call Numbnuts, offers us a gun that we cannot use for the rest of this game. It is at this point that we are introduced to various talents that we can get, and we get our first talent that allows us to eat the hearts of our opponents. Then Numbnuts here figures out that this door is locked, and luckily he's a trained electrician that opens up the door with zero issues. We then proceed to butcher all in our path and make our way into the subway system. We then come across our first example that the darkness just doesn't work if there just so happens to be a flashlight around. Thinking that the tragedy is going to be at an end, I turn around this corner and see that just so happens that civilization is filled with lights. Doing the best I can to weave in and around all the lights while butchering my opponents and eating their hearts, I find that this might be a little bit more tricky than I initially thought of. My mother always taught me to look both left and right before crossing a street, but she never said anything about trains. Having been traumatized by what I just saw, I hide from the true monster of this game, the locomotive. Moving through the wreckage of the death box on wheels, I find some survivors and decide to kill them and eat their hearts. And remember kids, always play on the railroad tracks with your girlfriend. After that horrifying experience with the death box on wheels, I must now question whether anything around me is truly real. I soon wake up from my episode and find that I just can't get enough of thug hearts. And soon we're back with a depressed guy in a chair to decide whether or not being addicted to thug hearts is really the best life choice.
It consumes you.
Moving on with the story, we return to our mansion where we finally get to take a look at what it means to be the mob boss. I eavesdrop on what my men think of me outside of work. I light a candle for my true lost love, Christine. Figuring out that you can do some truly horrible things in this game, like waste water. I proceed to spend probably what I would consider a little bit too much time wasting water. Proceeding then to meet up with the family friend, Uncle Grape, he tells me the man named Swifty was the one responsible for the attack on the restaurant. I then get my first actual skill that I will be able to use in combat, and it is called gun channeling. It allows me to use the darkness to channel through guns, so I don't actually use the guns for damage. Paying the local bar a visit, I unleash my inner hatred on pool tables. Reuniting with my old nemesis, a flashlight, I end up finding Swifty upstairs hiding in one of the rooms. Picking up and dual-wielding the micro-Uzis, but being sure not to actually use them. Then spending enough time to casually waste all of the ammunition so that I don't accidentally shoot someone in the face and cancel this entire run. I slowly make my way through Swifty's goons, one by one tearing them apart and eating their hearts. I unlock a new skill, which is debatably useless, and then proceed to take out my frustration on my useless skill on some scaffolding nearby. Coming to a near standstill at a dimly lit fence, we approach the first boss fight of this game. Unfortunately, try as I might, I was unable to hit the crane with my darkness tentacles, and I have not unlocked anything that allows me to necessarily hit that. The game suggested that I use some propane tanks nearby, but I didn't feel right with that. And so with zero ammunition in my guns, I decide to use dark channeling to finally do my damage against him. Waiting on the cooldown of this skill, I was able to now listen to a lot of the banter between Swifty and myself. Now that's some quality stuff. Eventually, some of his goons felt lonely and felt like their hearts needed to be munched on, and so I happily obliged. Eventually, making my way and slowly but surely whittling down his health and occupying myself by spinning in circles. I found it odd that the goons with the baseball bats happened to do far more damage than the 2-ton wrecking ball ever did when it hit me, causing enough damage to light the crane on fire. The end was finally in sight. And there we have it, the first boss fight complete. Now, chasing after Swifty. I end up seeing my dead girlfriend Samantha questioning my very sanity.
Must be losing my fucking mind.
Seeing my opportunity to kiss the girl, I try to take it, but unfortunately, she backs away, leaving me quite blue-balled for the rest of the run.
Nuh-uh.
But the promise of something more
John Carlos
slowly
won't be
keeps
back
me
in
going.
an hour. Why don't you come back around here for a minute?
Finding out that the cake was a lie angered me, and the light just angered me even more. I tried to take my frustration out on local generators and generator repairmen. Unlocking an ability that gives me more health every time I eat a heart, I felt like invincible. I became confused at a certain doorway as I wasn't too sure what light was stopping me from destroying everything, and I spent probably a little bit too much time figuring out which light I had to break. Taking out my frustration because I didn't know how light works on the local populace was quite easy, and I continued to make my way through this warehouse, unfortunately finding out the lights are all over warehouses. Unfortunately, Swifty was leading me in circles, and I was back in the original horrible light room. Becoming quite sick and tired of running around and all this light, I tried making my way through the level as quickly as I could. But unfortunately, the door to move on wouldn't open so long as there was a single man left alive and a single heart uneaten. It seemed to me that the goons were just getting smarter, as I just kept running more and more into light. Perhaps I was just getting dumber, because it just seemed happening over and over. But eventually, once everyone was defeated, I was able to take up my frustration once again on more generators, before finally meeting Swifty face to face. He didn't really seem to last long, as I was a darkness-deprived blue-ball lunatic. Contemplating whether or not I had done the right thing with Mr. Depressed Man in the chair, I returned back to the mansion. Here we get our first look at Johnny Powell, knower of all things the darkness. He proceeds to give me some good advice, meeting up with Uncle Grape to come up with a plan of attack. One of my men seems oddly offended that I would accuse him of having a contact at the local strip joint. I make my way to said strip joint and meet up with our local contact, who proceeds to give me two very large useful tips. The very darkness within me seems to be getting ideas of itself. I end up making her a promise that I probably won't be able to keep. I, for some reason, was given a gun that I probably won't be able to use. Proceeded to butcher everyone around me in what was luckily a dimly lit warehouse. I then, unfortunately, had to enter the mind of Numbnuts and got to see myself in all my glory. I ran around the vents for a bit, scaring everyone around me, wondering what in the heck is rummaging through the vents. Used my lovely little claws to butcher a bystander, ripping apart his throat, but kind of somewhat realizing that he wasn't actually a normal guy. Because of this, I didn't feel too bad. Making my way through the rest of the compound while avoiding the lights, as I was now a creature of the dark, climbing through whatever ways I could see to best make my way to where I could turn off the power so that the rest of me would be able to make it through the warehouse. I then came across, which is probably the worst security guard ever, next to what is probably the smallest security camera ever. Thankfully returned back to my body in all of his awesomeness and away from, well, numbnuts. I was able to finally get a useful talent called Demon Blades, which allowed my tentacles to do more damage after I'd recently eaten a heart, which, you know, is something I do quite often. I came across some posers and wannabes who had darkness-like things around their faces that provided some type of armor, but quickly dispatched of them. While they were poser wannabes, it did seem that the light didn't seem to have the same negative effect on them than it did to me. I call hacks. I definitely did not walk into a trap on which I could not get out and the light overwhelmed me, because that would just be stupid of me to do. And as we all know, I'm not the one that we call numbnuts. When I finally come to, I find there's a man giving me a really strange high five, but I tend not to think too much on it. Get maybe a little too close to a Holocaust survivor for my liking. Was forced to make a choice on who lives or dies. It didn't really seem like too fun a game, but I ended up choosing to sacrifice Eddie. That's what you get for forgetting my birthday last year, Eddie. Took a walk down memory lane where I saw my old girlfriend, Guinevere. Being fully reinvigorated from seeing my lost love Stacy, I proceed to put the hurt on the other guys, as one might say. I came across the next QuickTime event that forced me to actually use a gun, because every time I didn't, I would have to restart. And from that point on, I went on to go check out whatever happened to my help, and it turns out she was just kinda hanging out. The rest of the level was pretty easy, as I made a very mad dash through a burning building. For some reason I noticed though, the light from the fire didn't really affect the darkness all too much. I ran into some annoying cultists who tried to be heroes, but I made quick work of them and ate their hearts. Met up again with depressed guy in a chair, though I think there was something different about him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it though. Hey, thanks guys for watching. If you would remember to like, comment, and subscribe, really appreciate that.